Hi, I'm Charles Feldman, and welcome to another edition of SOS America. For those of you watching or listening for the first time, this is a podcast about what is going on here currently in the United States. Of course, if you are here in the U.S., you are more than welcome to join this journey. If you are living outside of the United States and you're scratching your head almost every day going, what the hell is happening in the United States? Then this is a podcast that I think you will find of particular interest. On each episode, we talk to various experts about what is happening. We talk about politics, we talk about the economy, we talk about cultural issues, we even talk about medical issues, because that has been greatly impacted under the current administration in Washington. And it's impacted not just the way medicine is now going to be practiced in this country, but also it's going to have an impact, and it has had an impact, in fact, on countries around the globe. Having said that, I'd like to welcome to this episode of SOS America, Richard Painter. Richard was the chief White House ethics lawyer. That was during the George W. Bush administration. He is currently a professor of law at the University of Minnesota. And Richard, I think are you still vice chair of Crew?
No, I
No.
stepped off the board of Crew. I work with Crew from time to time on issues of ethics in government. It's a wonderful organization, but I'm no longer involved as a board member.
Okay, but you worked vice chair, so that people know what Crew, it's an acronym for Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Richard, thank you for being with us on this episode. And I have a little smirk on my face because when I just read that about responsibility and ethics in Washington, my first question to you is, do we have responsibility now and ethics in Washington?
We've certainly seen a deterioration of responsibility and ethics in our federal government, certainly since 2017. We had warning signs throughout the Bush and Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations about problems in government ethics and the politicization of government ethics. But the standards of ethics in the executive branch in particular have deteriorated dramatically since Donald Trump's first term. President Biden's term was not very encouraging in the ethics arena. They had a lot more problems than the Obama administration had. And now Donald Trump's second term appears to be a free-for-all for the president to enrich himself, his family members to enrich themselves, and potentially for the abuse of power over the next 3.5 years.
When you talk about how Mr. Trump is apparently enriching himself and his family, can you go into a little bit more detail about that? How is he doing that? And I suppose there are people who are going to say, well, a lot of politicians seem to go to Washington, and when they leave Washington, seem to have a lot more money than when they first arrived. Isn't that the norm?
Certainly, some politicians do enrich themselves through public service, although most of them, it's after they leave government, they go into lobbying firms and make a lot of money that way. There are some exceptions. Politicians have made a lot of money off books and so forth while in office. Very, very few, though, have made such enormous sums as the Trump family has in business operations during a presidency. Just one example, in 2021, Donald Trump said that Bitcoin was a scam. It really clearly indicated people shouldn't be investing in cryptocurrency. Now we see estimates of his own net worth in cryptocurrency in the billions of dollars, potentially as much as $6 or $7 billion gambling cryptocurrency as well, while his administration issues executive orders seeking to make the United States the cryptocurrency capital of the world. This is just one example where it appears that Donald Trump and his family are going to profit enormously from his occupying the White House.
I mentioned in the introduction to you that you were the chief ethics attorney during the George W. Bush administration. Is there somebody who in the current White House has the position that you had for Bush?
If there is an ethics lawyer in the White House right now, I have no idea who it is. And we're not hearing very much from the White House about ethics. In the past few months, the president has fired the director of the United States Office of Government Ethics. Indeed, at the very beginning of the director's term, that's supposed to be a 5-year term. It's not a political position. Ethics is not supposed to be political. But the OGE director has been fired. The Office of Special Counsel they had there has been fired. They enforce the civil service laws. We've had dozens of inspectors general throughout federal agencies fired by the president, and the list goes on. It appears to me that the president wants to clamp down on anyone who is going to complain about ethics issues in the second Trump administration.
Well, I'm guessing that there are some people who may be wondering what an ethics person does, ethics lawyer does in the White House, because I think there's this notion that the president of the United States pretty much does whatever, he or maybe someday she wants to do. How does it actually work? When you were in the White House, did you go over to President Bush and say, no, you can't do that, or it's okay to do that? How does that work?
Well, first, it's the job of every lawyer in the White House, not just the chief ethics lawyer, to explain to the president and to the president's staff that no, the president can't do whatever he wants to do. The president has certain powers under Article 2 of the Constitution, but also has responsibilities to take care of that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. I discussed this in detail in a book that I have forthcoming with Cambridge University Press with Tom Sullivan, my co-author,
Mhm.
on the power, responsibility, and accountability of the presidency. And so, no, the president can't do whatever he wants. There are laws, there's the Constitution. When it comes to financial conflicts of interest, the Constitution specifically prohibits receiving any profits and benefits from foreign governments. The Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. Every president we've had has taken that clause seriously. Other than Donald Trump, we've had serious problems with Donald Trump's business dealings with foreign governments and foreign sovereign wealth funds. Many of us believe in violation of the U.S. Constitution. We had ethics issues in the Bush administration for sure, but that wasn't one of them. And also financial conflicts of interest in general. The president was not one of them. We have not had a president since the Civil War with substantial personal financial conflicts of interest with official duties of the presidency until Donald Trump came along in 2017. And even President Biden, despite all of the scandals in his administration and my criticism of the Biden administration, he did not himself have a financial interest that conflicted with his official duties. Donald Trump stands alone in that respect among our modern day presidents. And this undermines confidence in our government when we don't know whether the President of the United States is taking official action for the good of the country, for the good of our economy, for our national security, or to enrich himself and his family.
Well, I mean, we're pretty early into this second term of the Trump administration. There's a lot more to go. Where do you think this is headed? I mean, we've seen these seismic shifts in just the areas that you've ticked off in just what, half a year. What happens, do you think, in the next 3.5 years?
I don't know what's going to happen next 3.5 years, but it's been downhill rapidly in ethics in the second Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, they at least pretended to be complying with the ethics rules most of the time, although there were instances in which the president basically said, I don't care. For example, if Kellyanne Conway stands on the White House lawn and in her official capacity endorses or attacks political candidates in violation of the Hatch Act, And it's pretty clear Donald Trump didn't care. The president just said, okay, I don't care if she's violated the law. There were serious problems in the first Trump administration, obviously much worse once he lost the election in 2020. But for the most part, during most of the administration, they were at least trying to pretend they were complying with and they took ethics seriously. And what we've seen in the second Trump administration is they simply don't care. They're going to do whatever they want to do. And there are a number of reasons for that. As I said, I don't think President Biden set a very good standard with all the shenanigans with Hunter Biden, the various deals with the University of Pennsylvania and the Penn Biden Center, the classified documents, and of course, the cover up of the president's age and ability to serve a second term. There were a lot of problems in the Biden administration. Democrats, of course, defended him, putting them in a weaker position to go after Trump right now. But Donald Trump also has the attitude, look, I was elected president despite four criminal indictments and one criminal conviction up in New York. The voters still reelected me. So why should I care about a bunch of ethics rules? And I think that's the attitude we're getting from this administration.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. That I'm sure there are people who are watching this who may be wondering how somebody is president of the United States who is whether one, agrees with the prosecution that happened in New York, whether they thought it was a good case or not. The fact is that he was convicted, Mr. Trump, on, I believe it was 34 felony counts by a jury. And I'm sure there are people who are thinking, well, how does somebody like that become president of the United States anyway? How does that happen?
He becomes president because the voters voted for him. And he won not only the Electoral College, but this time the popular vote. Now, does that mean that the voters support him and his policies, much less his personality? I don't think so. We had a situation where the Democratic Party dropped the ball there. President Biden hung on to try to cling on to power for too long. They covered up the ability of the president there to serve a second term. They didn't have a real primary. There was a collapse in the Democratic Party. And if they'd had a real primary, maybe Kamala Harris would have won it and would have had the opportunity to put together a campaign and go after Donald Trump. So there are a lot of problems with the Democrats, and I think that's really a lot more of what happened as opposed to the majority of the American people really wanting Donald Trump back in the White House 4 years after they threw him out of the White House to elect Joe Biden. But for whatever reason, Donald Trump perceives that this is a vindication, this election, that the voters think, well, everything he did was okay. It's not just the New York indictment, which was I'd say, the weakest of the criminal cases against
Yeah.
Donald Trump. The most serious case was the January 6th case. I mean, he clearly lost that election to Joe Biden, and he tries to cling on to power by using the Justice Department and using his power as president and as head of the Republican Party with fake electors and all the rest of it, ends up inciting a riot on January 6th, 2021. And this is very dangerous behavior when you have a head of state who's nearing the end of his term who decides he just wants to stick around. He's going to do anything he can to stick around. And this is how democracies turn into dictatorships. That case should have gone to trial. The Justice Department was way too slow in appointing Jack Smith to be special counsel. Jack Smith probably shouldn't have even gotten into that big fight about what's official capacity and so forth, because of personal capacity, alleged crimes were serious enough. He could have taken that case to trial instead of getting the Supreme Court all involved in it. So a lot of things went wrong here. But once again, I don't think the fact that voters chose Donald Trump in November 2024 is in any way a vindication of his policies or certainly his conduct in office. We need to keep in mind he was thrown out of office after 4 years in the first Trump administration, where his conduct was a lot better than it is right now.
You mentioned in passing the word dictatorship. it would be, I think, a stretch, and I think you would agree with me here, that, to say that the U.S. is a dictatorship now. Are we getting there?
No, we're not a dictatorship. We are a representative democracy, but we need to be constantly vigilant to protect representative democracy against the threat of authoritarianism. And we've lived through difficult times before. For example, the McCarthy era, when our fear, a legitimate fear of communism and of the Soviet Union, was taken advantage of by politicians who sought to oppress all dissent and Joe McCarthy, Senator McCarthy of Wisconsin in the 1950s, had very clear authoritarian leanings. But the Republican Party at the end of the day was able to repudiate him. And we had leaders who were going to stand up to that kind of thing. We had leaders in the Republican and Democratic Party who stood up to Richard Nixon when Richard Nixon abused his powers in the presidency. And after he left the presidency, it was Richard Nixon who said that, well, if the president does it, has to be legal. It must be legal. Well, that's wrong. In a representative democracy, we cannot tolerate that. And now we have Donald Trump, who's articulating pretty much the same message. But unfortunately, we don't have as many people in Congress willing to stand up to him. And particularly, we need a bipartisan coalition in Congress to stand up to him. And furthermore, we have some rumblings that the president doesn't believe he needs to follow a court order, the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I know we've had far left extremists, mostly academics. This is a guy, Sam Moyne, down at Yale, and some others who said, well, the president shouldn't have to obey a Supreme Court order, at least trying to encourage Biden not to. But Biden's administration never toyed with that idea that you wouldn't obey a Supreme Court order. That is the essence of our republic. It has been for over 200 years that the Supreme Court gives an order, the president's got to comply with it. And now we
Yeah,
have Donald Trump and the
yeah.
Vice President of the United States even is suggesting that a court order doesn't necessarily have to be obeyed. And that's a fundamental attack on our system of checks and balances. And we need to rein that kind of thing in and make it very, very clear to the president that there are rules here and the rules have to be followed.
Since you brought up Richard, the ghost of Richard Nixon, it does kind of dovetail into this next question. I mean, Nixon, as you pointed out, did say, and I think it was in that David Frost interview, if I'm not mistaken, from years ago, that if the president does it, or words to that effect, then it is legal. But as you know, we just not too long ago had a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that, in a way, didn't it support what President Nixon said? In that if I understand that ruling, while the president is in office, almost anything that the president does can't be prosecuted. So doesn't that mean that Nixon, at some level, was right?
Well, I don't know that Nixon was right as opposed to the U.S. Supreme Court being wrong on this point.
All
Now, I
right.
should emphasize the Supreme Court in Trump versus the United States is a terrible decision, was only focusing on whether the President of the United States can be criminally prosecuted. If something could be illegal that the president does, and then the court enters an injunction and tells him he can't do it. And as I say, everybody in the United States, except for the extremists of the far left and the far right, believes that if the court tells the president what he has to do, he has to do it. And whether it's Nixon turning over the tapes, and Nixon did turn over the tapes, the White House tapes, or telling President Biden that he couldn't just write off a whole bunch of student loan debt, whatever it is, the president has to comply with court orders. So the Trump versus United States case has said that no, you can't criminally prosecute a president for exercising core constitutional powers, whatever those are, and that
Hmm.
there's a strong presumption of criminal immunity in instances where the president is using other official powers, no immunity if it's personal conduct. So there's some ambiguity in that decision. I think it's a terrible decision. But we cannot extrapolate from it that the president gets to do anything he wants, and the court can't enter an order telling the president, you can do this, you can't do that. For example, when he sends the military into Los Angeles, there's a very strong case to be made that he can't do that under statutes, and the courts may tell him no, he can't. And it's critically important that the president comply. Um, Now, that being said, if you don't have the threat of criminal prosecution for a president who violates the law, you've taken one of the very important tools out of the toolbox that controls a criminal president. He can't be prosecuted. He's going to say, I can do anything he wants. And then you can ask, well, can he be impeached then as an alternative? Well, yes, he can be. Donald Trump was impeached twice, but it takes two-thirds of the Senate to convict the president, throw him out of office. And at this point, it doesn't appear that the Republicans in the Senate are willing to stand up to Donald Trump and draw a line in the sand and tell him what he can do and what he can't do. And that's unfortunate.
But if Richard, the court system is supposed to serve as a kind of braking system against a president who is intent on breaking the law, hasn't Mr. Trump figured out, or at least his administration figured out, a way to turn that upside down and inside out? And by that I mean uh, by going to the courts and constantly appealing. What the strategy seems to be is go ahead, do whatever you want to do. If a court objects, a lower court, you appeal it to the next court. And if that, you just keep appealing and you keep tying up the legal system. And in the meantime, you go ahead and you do pretty much what you want to do. So hasn't the Trump administration figured out how to, in effect, use the court system to its own advantage?
They're certainly doing that, and Justice Department lawyers are assisting with this. And I've written in a recent article, actually in the Case Western Law Review, I talk about this problem because government lawyers really are supposed to represent the government, not just their political superiors. And our government in the United States is based on the rule of law. And so if there's an interpretation of the law that is really unreasonable, it's just simply not going to stand up on appeal. To go assert such an interpretation of the law in pleadings to just simply delay and drag everything out in the far-fetched hope that, gee, maybe eventually the Supreme Court might agree with us, but it's really extremely unlikely. What the lawyers are doing is abusing the system. They aren't faithful to the law. And when we have a government that's founded in the law, grounded in the law, those government lawyers are betraying their own clients simply in order to do whatever the president of the United States wants them to do. The judges shouldn't be going along with this. It's important for judges to start issuing injunctions and for the Supreme Court to be willing to step in more quickly. For example, this business of deporting people who were born in the United States. I mean, I think the language is pretty clear in the Natural Born Citizen Clause of the 14th Amendment that those people are U.S. citizens, and we're not going to look into how their parents got here or whatever. You're born in the United States or you're not. And that seems pretty clear what the language is. And the Supreme Court ought to resolve that issue. If they've got, five justices who really agree with Donald Trump that the children of immigrants born here aren't citizens for whatever reason, then they can come out and say so. But there's no excuse for just dragging this thing out. Well, Trump runs around sending ICE all over the country, arresting people and threatening to arrest people who actually are U.S. citizens, and indeed arresting some U.S. citizens. So I think the courts need to be a little bit more, well, quite a bit more assertive in standing up to the president, and that includes the U.S. Supreme Court itself.
Okay, but here I think, at least from my point of view, it seems to be the problem. You mentioned lawyers who are abusing the system, Congress that is apparently more than happy, at least the Republican part of Congress, to roll over and play dead and not function as it's supposed to function as a co-equal branch of government. And you have at the lower levels of the court, certainly a lot of judges who have recently, while there are certainly a fair number of them that have ruled against Mr. Trump, there are also a fair number, especially at the appellate division and certainly at the Supreme Court with its most recent rulings, that seem to be in concurrence with Mr. Trump, or at least their rulings are helping Trump continue to do some of the things he's doing pending further litigation. So if this is all happening, that suggests that it's not just Donald Trump who is abusing the system, but there are an awful lot of other people who are doing it as well. And that raises the question, why are they doing it? I get why Trump is doing it. Why are they so willing to go along for the ride?
Well, we have more people who think the law is just politics and that there's no objective truth and right and wrong independent of political perspective. And that ethics is a question of being a Democrat or a Republican, and that loyalty to political principles is more important than objective truth, the rule of law, which applies to everyone, regardless of politics. And this mindset is a fundamental threat to a democracy. And we've seen it on the extreme left and the extreme right. We go back 100 years to Germany in the Weimar Republic years when they did have a representative democracy. And the legal philosopher Carl Schmitt wrote his famous essay, The Concept of the Political, where he was arguing that law, it really is all about politics, that politics, it dictates everything, that there's no objective right and wrong in law independent of politics. Carl Schmitt also wrote in several essays and books about the role of the executive, and that the executive, the president of Germany and the chancellor appointed by the president, really spoke for all the people and expressed the will of the people, and the concept of the exception, that the executive can make exceptions to the law because the executive, the president and the chancellor, speak for the people of the entire country, as opposed to this legal framework, which really is just about politics. That was what Carl Schmitt wrote about. And then he became a lawyer for the president of Germany, von Hindenburg, and the chancellor, von Papen, in the early 1930s, arguing, for example, that the federal government could send troops into Prussia for law enforcement purposes against the will of the government of Prussia, somewhat similar to what we've seen in California in the past few months. And they were able to persuade the German Supreme Court that that was acceptable. Well, we all know what happened the next year when you had a new chancellor in there named Adolf Hitler who said he's going to do the same thing all over the country. And Carl Schmitt joined the Nazi Party. Now, why I emphasize this is we've seen people at the far right and the far left in the United States praise Carl Schmitt. The critical legal studies movement, critical theory movement, loves the guy. They cite him all over the place. There's an entire Oxford handbook to Carl Schmitt, where a lot of leftists talking about how, well, all law is politics, and so forth. The guy must be right. And the far right loves it as well, and embraces this concept. We've certainly seen this in the Trump administration, but we saw it before, quite frankly, with some of the far right lawyers who got involved in drafting torture memos during the Bush administration. John Yoo, who argued for the concept of the executive making the exception. Oh, there's a torture statute there, but the President of the United States has the power under Article 2 to make an exception to that statute. Never mind that President Bush never signed an executive order authorizing torture, but these lawyers are going to argue that basically, in the name of the president, CIA agents can waterboard detainees. And there were people high up in the White House who were going along with this. So the point is that this idea that all law is politics, the so-called concept of the political, dating back to Carl Schmitt, has taken over our legal profession. We've seen the far left, some of the academics teaching it in law schools, but the far right is putting it into practice. In the United States, when it comes to extremist ideas entering our political system, at this point, the threats are almost entirely on the right. I mean, the crazy leftists are in the academia and so forth, but not in the Democratic Party. You got a handful of them, but not very many. Um, the problem with the Democrats, though, is that they were not willing to be clear what the rules were under President Biden. And I do think that they're in a little bit of a weaker position, having defended some of the antics under the Biden administration, a bit of a weaker position going after Trump. Now, Trump is a lot worse than anything we saw under President Biden. But I think the Democrats also need to come around to embracing the concept of objective truth. These are the rules. We don't allow it. We're not going to tolerate, for example, the president's sons going around making money off the presidency. I don't care if it's Hunter Biden with some artwork he's selling for 40 grand or something, or the Trump boys are making 40 million off the presidency.
Yeah, but what's
We
going
need
to
to get
stop? Yeah,
back to
but Richard,
objective truth and clear standards.
but what's going to stop this? I mean, all of this is happening. You're quite right. But I don't see anything on the horizon, do you, that's going to stop Mr. Trump's kids from making a small, maybe a large fortune in going around the world and exploiting the name of their father and the position of their father for their own economic benefit. Who's going to stop all this? Not the lawyers that you're talking about who are actually aiding and abetting what the Trump administration is doing, not the president himself. Obviously, he's not going to tell his kids, hey, stop doing that. It makes me look bad. And oh, by the way, it's probably or maybe even illegal. What stops all of this?
Well, who should be stopping is Congress.
But it's
And that's
not.
what the founders anticipated when they drafted the Constitution, that Congress would be a check on the president. And Congress isn't doing their job. So at this point, I think we need to think seriously in 2026 about voting them out. And I have my differences with the Democratic Party. I'm a political independent. But at this point, dealing with this president, the only people willing to stand up to him, I guess, are the Democrats. You're going to have to put more of them in there, even if I disagree with their political views on some things. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to control abuse of power in the presidency, and Congress needs to do its job and stand up to the president. Right now, Congress isn't doing anything at all. And this is very, very unfortunate. It's a great danger to our republic to have a presidency that's out of control. So the voters will have to make some decisions in November. But I would say the voters should consider abuse of power in the presidency is the number one issue. I don't care where someone is on abortion and immigration, all that stuff, not right now. It's about the future of our representative democracy. Are we going to hold this man accountable if he abuses power? And as much as I wish the Democrats had done a better job of telling President Biden, for example, hey, one term is enough, fella. Let's have
Yeah.
a real primary. At this point, maybe we need them back there in the two houses of Congress, have some hearings, and at least expose some of what's going on.
Well,
And if President Trump wants to continue acting this way, he may get himself impeached for a third time.
you were, of course, what, a lifelong Republican. Now you describe yourself as, how did you describe yourself as a what?
I'm an independent, but I don't think
Independent.
my views on political issues have changed a lot. I was always a moderate Republican. I never agreed with the arch conservatives on much. I knew how to work with them back when arch conservatives believed in some principles. People like John Bolton, I strongly disagreed with his idea of what foreign policy ought to look like when he was in the Bush administration as our ambassador to the United Nations. I thought John Bolton was trying to get us into too many doggone wars, and we did get into too many wars. I disagree, but I respected John Bolton a lot. And now what do we see? John Bolton serves under President Trump, leaves and writes a book that criticizes the president, And now in the second Trump administration, we got an FBI raid over at John Bolton's home, where they're claiming that he's had classified information. Well, I'd like to see what they've got. It seems to me the president is retaliating against people who just disagree with him on anything.
Well, by the
Uh,
way, is it?
that's not
But
the
isn't
Republican Party I was part of.
right? By the way, I mean, there's a bit of an irony here, isn't there? Because you mentioned John Bolton and the accusation attributed so far to just, I think, sources at the White House that perhaps he is in possession of classified information. But wasn't that actually at the heart of one of the cases against Mr. Trump himself, that he made off with classified information that he kept in Mar-a-Lago in Florida when he was out of office? So there is a bit of irony in this, isn't there?
Well, that's for sure. And I posted on social media on X this morning a picture of those boxes of classified documents stored next to the potty at Mar-a-Lago. And I said that the FBI can let us know if they find box of classified documents stored next to the potty there in John Bolton's home. But until they do that, I'm assuming this is just a good old-fashioned retribution. And
Well,
this
but yeah, but wait a
about
minute. But that's interesting that you say that. Good old-fashioned retribution. But good old-fashioned retribution is not something that's supposed to be
it's
associated with the
not
White House,
supposed to be at all.
but
But
it
it's the way
is.
I refer to the old I'm talking about the way the political bosses that operate and the cities you mess around with the boss and you get the prosecutors on you and that kind of thing. We've had some of that in American history. We have not had it in the White House for quite some time. Richard Nixon was pretty good at this kind of thing. He didn't go as far as Donald Trump, but he had a whole scheme that they were going to blow up the Brookings Institution. They
Yeah.
were going after political enemies as well. But this is a very dangerous pattern of behavior, where you
What
don't
do you
like
think?
somebody, you just send the
I,
FBI after them.
Yeah, I'm curious since we've brought up Nixon's name a number of times now. Uh, what do you think Nixon, if he were alive today, what would he make of what Donald Trump is doing? Do you think he would be supportive and say, "Yeah, I wish I would have done what Donald Trump is doing," or would there be a line that even Mr. Nixon would not have crossed?
Well, we can conjecture about President Nixon. He never did really recognize that what he'd done was wrong.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the tragedies of President Ford's pardon. I thought President Ford, in many ways, was a very good president, helped us heal national wounds from Watergate, Vietnam. But this idea that, well, we have to move forward, have to pardon President Nixon, it would have been better to have him go to trial, even if it was given a commutation, a kind of jail sentence. If he'd gone to trial for obstruction of justice, which is what he did, and the evidence is very clear that he engaged in obstruction of justice in his official capacity. There was a draft indictment of Richard Nixon having to do with paying off witnesses, but a lot of that conduct was in an official capacity. And if he'd gone to trial and then he'd gone to the Supreme Court in the 1970s with this argument that, well, there's immunity from criminal prosecution for a president acting in his official capacity, I don't believe the Supreme Court in the 1970s would have bought that. I think they would have said, no, there is not. They would have had a very different decision than what we got in Trump versus the United States in 2024. That was a very different Supreme Court. Supreme Court willing to stand up to the president. A Republican dominated Supreme Court, but a Supreme Court willing to stand up to the president. And I think we would have been much better off as a country if there had been some criminal charges brought against President Nixon. Not that he needed to go to jail or anything, but we need to sort this out, that no person is above the law, to send a message to future presidents that crimes in office are not going to be tolerated. And that would include President Clinton, who, by the way, lied under oath and got away with it, committed perjury and got away with it. Obviously, not as serious as what Nixon did or what I've seen going on in the Trump administration. But the
It,
Democrats who defended Clinton, I just think, made fools of themselves, trying to come up with excuses for presidential abuse of presidential power and crimes committed in the presidency.
Somebody watching this in another country, should they care about what's happening here with the Trump administration, or is it just sort of entertainment if you don't happen to be living here?
We should care about what happens in other countries in the world. We in the United States should care what happens in the United Kingdom and France, Germany, particularly the countries that are strong representative democracies. We went through a period in the 1930s of not caring what was happening in other countries, and we paid the price for that. And so I think that we should all care about what's happening, particularly in our world's major democracies, including the United States, and that we protect democracy. We should be protecting democracy as much as possible within the European Union. Countries like Hungary that are backsliding should be told, hey, this is not the way to go. And if the United States starts to backslide, I hope we can hear from our allies that they think this is wrong. And the Prime Minister of the UK should be speaking out about this and not just spending time up at the golf course up there in Scotland, making the President of the United States feel good about himself. Democracy is important, and we need to protect democracy and defend democratic principles throughout the world.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised at all by how obsequious all the world, these Western European leaders were recently when they met with President Zelensky of Ukraine at the White House with Mr. Trump, and they all seem to be going out of their way to say to Mr. Trump how wonderful he was and how great he was, and their appreciation for his efforts to bring peace to Ukraine. I kind of found that to be a level of being obsequious that I had never quite seen before. Uh, maybe that has happened. I don't know. But what was your take on that?
Well, unfortunately, I think that's a large part of what this tariff war thing is all about. It's not really about protecting American jobs, making America great again, or bringing in revenue from tariffs. But it's about throwing a weight around and saying, okay, we're going to put these big tariffs on all these countries all over the world. Now come and work your own private deal with us. And but part of working a private deal is making sure you don't criticize the President of the United States. It doesn't matter what the trade imbalance is. If you kiss up to the president, you're going to get a good deal. If you offend him, well, things are going to work out a little bit differently. And so the trade war, the tariffs and all that, I think is being used as a political weapon. We see this going on with Brazil in particular. They got a fellow who Trump likes and is in trouble, former president down there. And Trump wants to take his side. He's going to start throwing some tariffs at them until they cave in. But it's basically kiss my behind, or I'm going to give you a big tariff to worry about. And the world leaders are scared of that because we get a trade war going, we could destroy the global economy pretty quickly.
This country has not ever done particularly well with third parties at the national level. But is it time for one? The Republican Party is certainly not the Republican Party that existed when you considered yourself, I think, to be a Republican. Uh, and I'm not quite sure it's going to reform itself anytime in the near future. So is this a ripe time to have another party, perhaps?
I think we need to give this serious consideration. And the Republican Party itself came into existence in the 1850s because the two major parties were dysfunctional, the Whigs and the Democrats, very dysfunctional in dealing with the slavery question. Nobody wanted to say very clearly that slavery was morally wrong and should not expand into the West and should probably be abolished. That was the core argument for founding the Republican Party under Abraham Lincoln. So when the two major parties aren't able to deal with the crises that confront the country, third parties have come into existence, and the Republican Party was one of them. Well, here we are in a situation where the Republican Party does control both houses of Congress and the White House. Six of the nine Supreme Court justices were nominated by Republican presidents. But many Americans perceive the country is going in the wrong direction. We have the deterioration of ethics in our government, lack of confidence in our government, extreme disparities of wealth, the corruption problem, and yet the Democrats aren't really offering much of a solution. What we got under 4 years of President Biden was just marginally better. It was better than the first Trump administration, but it was disappointing in many ways as well. And the way Democrats would just loyally support President Biden and never say, hey, we ought to have a real primary. If anybody even suggested that, they were thrown out of the Democratic Party, including Dean Phillips, the congressman from Minnesota, who dared to run against President Biden. Well, he lost his House seat. He's back here in Minnesota. So the Democrats are playing a little bit of the same game. It's just not with the authoritarian ilk of the Trump administration. I do think it's time for a third party. A lot of voters are fed up with both of them.
Well, both of them perhaps, but there was a an interesting New York Times piece the other day, and when this gets posted, it'll be the other week, but that's okay. That talked about how there's been a significant drop off in new voters registering as Democrats. And one would think that if there was this great opposition in the country, especially with young people against the Trump administration, that you would see a surge of people wanting to register as Democrats, but they're not. What do you make of that?
I think voters are discouraged, and the Democratic Party hasn't had any strong leaders since Barack Obama. Biden, people liked him in some ways, but he was not a strong leader, and he didn't know when time is up. Hillary Clinton was very disappointing. She had ethics issues of her own, which if the Democrats had focused on, they might not have nominated her in 2016. The Democrats did have a strong leader in the White House for 8 years under President Obama. I didn't agree with everything he did, but he was a man of integrity. People trusted and could rally support behind him. So at this point, the Democrats don't have a leader, and maybe one will emerge who can speak to everybody, not just a certain segment of the Democratic Party. They have a lot of these issues with identity politics, and all of that, which President Obama didn't play those games. He was trying to reach out to everybody in the country. He was quite successful at it. But unless the Democrats get their act together, younger voters in particular aren't going to be very interested. And the amount of money, that money influences politics um, in both political parties is shocking. The idea that you need to have millions of dollars just to consider running for office, and there are these PACs and super PACs. A lot of younger voters just are alienated and want to have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and maybe you've touched on something here that kind of dovetails with the question I was going to ask, which is that is there something about our system, and maybe it's the money that you bring up. Is there something about the system that in order to successfully run and become president of the United States or any other very high political leader, a governor of a state, perhaps, or a senator, that it kind of lends itself to corruption. And I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush because there are certainly many people in government service that I think are well-meaning and are certainly not corrupt. But you ticked off in a very quick succession ethical issues, even bordering in some cases on corrupt issues involving Republican and Democratic presidents, all in recent American history, from Richard Nixon to Bill Clinton to you didn't think Gerald Ford committed anything, but okay, so we'll skip over Ford. But Donald Trump, you mentioned Hillary Clinton. Why is there a what seems to be an epidemic, if you will, of at least suspected corruption for people who have reached high office? Is it the money that's causing this?
Well, there are a lot of causes. Well, I think Gerald Ford was a great president for the very short time he had in office after Nixon resigned, that he should not have given that pardon to Nixon. I mean, if we had had a trial and had the opportunity in the 1970s to make it clear that no person is above the law, that presidents cannot commit crimes in office, we might have gotten rid of President Clinton a lot faster when he was caught committing perjury, and we wouldn't have tolerated what's happening under Donald Trump. So that's part of the tragedy, is not being willing to hold the president of the United States accountable. The second issue is, yes, the money in politics, the PACs, the super PACs, and the rest of it. And we've always had that, but it's just gotten worse and worse. And the U.S. Supreme Court has refused to even allow Congress to restrict the amount of money that's spent on electioneering communications. That was the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission case back in 2009. And now we hear that the Supreme Court justices who are sitting on the yachts of billionaires, I don't know what they're doing there, we got all this free travel. I have another book coming out with Oxford University Press called Conduct Unbecoming, about the ethics crisis at the U.S. Supreme Court. But what we have is the appearance that it's all about the money you need to run for office, to stay in office, and the money influencing nominations to the Supreme Court, money keeping tabs on justices thereafter, money in the White House. President Trump is building a whole new ballroom off the east wing of the White House that will take up to maybe 250, 300 people. So you can have more fundraisers at the White House, inviting more rich people who would support the president. We've always had some of this going on, but just more and more, and no one's willing to put the brakes on it. And that's why a lot of voters are just fed up. But I want to emphasize how important it is to work within our system and fix it and
Mhm.
fight corruption. Not buy into the idea, well, this is so corrupt, democracy is so corrupt, we just want some authoritarian who's going to come in there and clean everything up. Some man of the people who's going to be the magic solution. And that's part of that rhetoric we got from Donald Trump. He's going to drain the swamp. He didn't drain any swamp. He just came in there and made it into his own swamp. But the idea that we trust one person or that authoritarianism is the answer is extremely dangerous.
And on that note, Richard Painter, thank you so much for taking part in this episode of SOS America. For those of you who are who are listening, I should say. As always, we welcome any comments you have. You are, of course, welcomed and encouraged to subscribe. It's totally free. Until the next episode of SOS America, I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you much.